What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Dwain McFarland, and we have made it through 17 weeks of the season. We have made it to week 18. And Dwain, this is our first time talking in the new year, so I hope you had a really happy New Year's with your family.
Yeah, happy New Year to you as well. I've got my son in from college, so yeah, we've been having a good time. He heads back next week. Tuition is due next week, Marcus. It's a fun time of year.
Absolutely. You're clearing out all the holiday bills, and now here comes another big fat one right in your lap. So that is absolutely a great time. We do have a lot to talk about today. Yeah, we're going to go through some rankings, some utilization type stuff. We're going to talk about some playoff implications and that sort of thing. Also, maybe talk about some incentives that players have in their contracts and what they can gain depending on how they perform this weekend. But I want to start probably where I think a lot of shows have started this week, and that is the news about Damar Hamlin. Full disclosure, we had planned on doing a show earlier in the week, and then after, we were planning to record less than 24 hours after Hamlin had collapsed in Cincinnati, and just felt like it probably wasn't the right time, was probably too soon. So we skipped that, decided to do one later on in the week. But just want to kind of send our best wishes, our prayers and thoughts out to the Hamlin family, to the Buffalo Bills, to everyone sort of involved and close to that situation there. It was an absolutely scary thing to see. I think, I know when we talked, we were all sort of shook by the whole thing. And it's just a reminder that these are not just fantasy football players. They're not just football players. They are people with lives, with families of their own. And it's just sort of important to kind of keep that in mind. And I think this was a really scary reminder of that. By the way, if you haven't, the link for his charity is out there. I know that at least as of last check for me, it was over $7 million in donations. People have really come together in a really, really big way. So that's great to see. If you can donate, please do. Certainly would encourage that as well. And also, I think a good thing to remember is while we're thinking about Damar Hamlin and his family, spare a thought, spare a prayer for T. Higgins, who I know is definitely emotionally, I'm sure, going through this, as he was the guy who kind of laid that hit that led to the whole thing. So, as of the time that we are recording this, Hamlin's still in critical condition, although the reports are he is making progress. His dad addressed the Bills team on a Zoom call, so just asking for more prayers, and they're just waiting kind of day by day to see what sort of progress he has made. So that is all we know. That is kind of where we are right now with this. It's always really awkward in these real life situations to sort of transition back to fantasy sports and that, but that is sort of what we do here. So we will try as best we can to make as easy and clean a pivot as possible. So let's take a look at week 18 because it is still going on. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell says that the schedule will not be altered, that they will play the week 18 games as scheduled. So, Dwayne, we've got a lot of teams that have things locked up. We have a lot of teams that have some things to play for. You put together what is it, the restometer or the restometer? How are we pronouncing
I would say restometer.
Okay.
But, restometer also works.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So just take me through it. You put this thing together. Take me through what you're looking at here.
Yeah, basically just looking at the playoff implications for each teams. So like some teams have things completely sewn up. They can't really change anything. So, there's a good chance that starters could rest, right? Because why would the team play them? Now, every coach is different. Every team is different. There's things, people still believe in momentum, right? People believe in keeping your team fresh. How provable those things are, I don't know. But, you can look back in history and you can see that that's gone, both ways. You've seen people play their starters and get an injury that they wish they wouldn't have played their starters. You've seen teams rest starters and then they have a bust in the first round of the playoffs. And you're like, wow, shouldn't have rested your starters. So this is just really taking a look, at the math, like how probable they are for their seed and, do they have a chance to change things? And so there's a good list of teams that there's really not any risk, of rest. And I did not include teams, Marcus, that are just completely out of it. And they're really the wild cards because their coaching staffs could do anything. And a lot of times we don't get information really, before kickoff, we'll unless you get an inactive, something like that. But a lot of times it doesn't come down until later in the week. Some teams may share more, so we're not going to cover those. So that's something we'll have to continue to monitor. We'll update the rankings and stuff accordingly. Folks can find those over at fantasylife.com. As always, myself and Waz will be keeping those updated. But as far as the teams that we can feel really good about. Like, so in the AFC, you've got the Chiefs. So they play on Saturday. Like the Chiefs, if they want the number 1 seed, they have to just go all in. And they don't get the benefit of maybe sitting back and normally in that late, because the Chiefs sometimes, they're kind of split whether they play in the early or late window, but they play in the late window quite a bit. And so they could have potentially seen, did the Bills win? Did the Bengals win? That kind of thing. It's not going to be the case. So they're just going to have to go all in on the Raiders. So you're good with all of your Chiefs. As far as the Jaguars go, it's a win and in. So for them and the Titans. So whichever team wins the game, they move on to the playoffs. So there's no risk with those. The Ravens, they're already locked in. But if they beat the Bengals, they move into the number 3 seed, right? And so that's also why really with Cincinnati, they want to win as well because they don't want to. If the problem with Cincinnati, like you could say maybe they would want to, rest. There is a chance that if the Bills and the Cincinnati game is just called off, meaning it's not going to be made up at all, that really their seed wouldn't change. But I don't think the NFL is going to tell us that, Marcus, before this weekend.
No,
I think they want to. I don't
know if there's a plan right now. Yeah.
Well, and I think they want to keep all the competitive juices going. They want to keep every team all in as much as they can. Let's be honest, the NFL is still a business. They want their product to be as good as possible on the field. If they did let everyone know that the Bills and Bengals game is not going to be played, then technically you could have the Bengals really not have anything to play for here. So I put them in the low risk category, but a couple of others, the Patriots, they've got to win to get in. The Dolphins have got to win. They need some help. Steelers have got to win. They need some help. So all of those teams should play their starters the whole game. In the NFC, we get a gift. The Eagles are not playing until the late window, even though, typically, they're an early window team. So that really keeps things in play because the Packers, they play at the same time. The Cowboys play at the same time. The 49ers play at the same time in the late window. So I think there's a low chance for like the 49ers and Cowboys, Marcus. Like if they looked up and like the Eagles are just, completely, winning in blowout fashion, right? I think then, and they're playing the Giants, right, who we'll talk about in a second, who really could rest starters. Then I think maybe at the end of the game, like you could see the Cowboys, you could see the 49ers be like, okay, let's pull our starters. It's the fourth quarter. So I put the Cowboys, 49ers, and low. But the Vikings, they play before, and they still have a shot at the number 2 seed, so they won't know what happened with the 49ers. So I think that you're in good shape with the Vikings. The Packers have to win to get in. The Seahawks have to win, and they need some help to get in. So Eagles, Vikings, Packers, Seahawks, I think you're completely safe. Like I mentioned, Cowboys, 49ers, I think there's a low risk, but it wouldn't be like they're going to sit for the game, right? It would be late in the game, developments unfold in a way where it's like, okay, let's protect ourselves. We're not really going to change, what our seating looks like. On the AFC side, as far as like that low probability, we already talked about the Bengals, and it's really got a specific caveat to it. The other one would be the Bills. So they will know if Kansas City has won the game or not. And they're also waiting on the same information around, is their game going to be made up? So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then the other one really is the Chargers. And for them, the coaching staff has come out and said that they do care about where they're seated, and they can't be worse than the 6, but there's a chance they could move up to 5. And that's important because it could get you out of having to play the Chiefs, get you out of having to play the Bills. You don't really want to have to play those teams. It could get you out of having to play, I believe, the Bengals too. So it's one of those unique scenarios where sometimes between, a 1 seed move doesn't matter much. But in this particular case, it's a pretty big difference with who their opponent's going to be. So I think the Chargers are going to try to win the game. We'll have to kind of watch. A lot of times this really comes down to the coaching staff and how much they value the change in the seeding. And then there's just a few other teams. And these teams, it's really a high chance that the starters rest. And there's only 2. There's not any in the AFC, but in the NFC, you have the Buccaneers, who are the number 4 seed. They can't move up because their record is 8-8. So basically they're in because they're the division winner, right, of the NFC South. They get locked into that 4 seed, but they can't do anything else. They can't move up. They can't move down. There's really no reason. Now, their coaching staff has kind of hinted that they're going to play starters, but I think there's high risk here, right? I think they could change their mind on that. They could rest starters after the first quarter. There could be a lot of things going on with that. And then the second one is the Giants. So the Giants, they're in a similar situation. They can't really change their seeding. They're playing against the Eagles. So it is an NFC East opponent. They just want to really spoil, right, that 1 seed for the Eagles. that could potentially keep them motivated. But we have already had Brian Daboll come out and say that they're going to do what's best for their team. So I do believe that resting players is completely on the table. So for the Bucks and Giants, man, like I downgraded Mike Evans, I downgraded Chris Godwin, I downgraded Tom Brady, obviously Leonard Fournette, Rashad White. Those guys were all pushed down the board. Saquon gets pushed down the board big time for the Giants. The Giants receivers, I don't know for sure what they'll do. They kind of have a hodgepodge mixture of guys, but I think they'll probably rest. But Daniel Jones, like I wouldn't play Daniel Jones if I was the Giants. So I think he's at high risk. So he and Brady are way down the ranks.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I get the sense, like you do, that the Bucks may not really go all in on this because there really is not much to gain. Maybe you get your guys a few reps. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks sort of treat this like a preseason game, right? Where you see some of their guys come out, get a quarter, maybe a half, and then just kind of shut it down because there really is more to risk than to gain by having those guys play in some of those games. I'll say this about the 49ers. I'm with you. I think the risk of them is sitting guys is low. I also wonder, and this is just me speculating, they've got a 9-game winning streak. If you're Kyle Shanahan, do you want to go into the postseason? Like, do you want to let that go? Why not say you won 10 straight to get into the postseason, have your team stay red hot? But that calculation is made on the sidelines, and if you feel like it's better to save, say, Christian McCaffrey or save Brock Purdy, who was your third quarterback this year, maybe that makes a little bit more sense.
I would not want to play the 49ers, whatever team you are, just because now their Achilles heel is potentially, Brock Purdy gets exposed, right? He's getting to that stage where he's played enough games now that teams are going to know what his tendencies are, right? And they're going to be playing to those. But Shanahan protects him so much with that scheme. Yeah. But the thing with the 49ers is they really are, outside of that, Marcus, a really complete team. They've got the defense. If you want to, rush the passer, and that's how your defense wins, Cowboys, Eagles, that's the recipe nowadays, right? Because it's a passing league. The 49ers, are the most equipped team just to completely offset that because they'll just kill you in the run game. And then they'll use the screen passes. They'll use the play action. They do all the things that finally you get geared up to stop the run. And they're like, oh, just kidding. And that's how they hit the big plays. So they're a very scary team. I definitely wouldn't want to be traveling to San Francisco, which is most likely going to be the case unless you're the Eagles and you can win this weekend. The 49ers are in a great spot. And then you just mentioned the streak they're on. They probably scare everyone in the playoffs just because they can negate basically the strength of any other team. You're really good passing the ball. They've got a great defense. They stop the run better than anyone in the NFL. You're really good at rushing the passer. They can just run the ball down your throat. There's just so many things they can do.
Yeah, so somehow weirdly Jared Stidham found a way to kind of get over on them.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened. Kudos to him for playing a really great game, but I think it caught all of us by surprise that the Raiders put up 34 points on the 49ers last week. Let's get to the utilization. Let's get to some of the ranking stuff. Of course, as Dwayne mentioned, you can check that out at fantasylife.com. Starting at quarterback, because Aaron Rodgers, who has been, as the kids would say, pretty mid most of the season, you got him as a mid-range QB1, which is definitely an upgrade over where he's been most of the year.
Yeah, and some of this does come down to the things we just talked about. We know the Packers have to win to get in. I know each week we talk about who's playing the Texans, who's playing the Lions. Well, the Packers are playing the Lions. And so we've got a really, a great opportunity for a shootout in this game. The Lions are also trying to win the game. They could get news earlier in the day that would let them know they are eliminated, from contention. But I just don't see Dan Campbell laying down, period. No. Right. If they have a chance to, really, beat Green Bay in the last game of the season with the culture he's trying to build, that kind of thing, I don't see them letting up. So I just think this is, if we look across the weekend, there's only a few games that really have that eruption potential, as far as fantasy points go. And I think this is definitely one of those. Now it's tricky with Rodgers because he's eclipsed 20 points only once this season, Marcus. That's crazy. Only one time. And if you look at it, it's one of those scenarios where when they played the Lions last time, Rodgers really could have had a huge game. If you think back, I don't know how much of that game you saw, but I went back and watched most of that game on film just because I remember Red Zone catches my attention around things on Sunday, and so I'll just jot notes. And then usually Thursday is my day. I'll go back and watch some of those things, or if I can, I'll watch some. I may pick certain things when I'm writing the utilization report. But he had 2 picks inside the 10-yard line. One of them was on a tip pass, and one of them was just on a weird overthrow where like he and the receiver were not on the same page. So Rodgers, that was his highest yardage game of the season, 291 yards, and it could have been a 2 to 3 touchdown game. So that gave me, a little bit more comfort because I looked at where I had him. Like, wow, I've got him like as a mid-range QB1 this weekend. Like he hasn't done this all season. So there's definitely some projection here. And there's definitely some hope and optimism baked into this. I will fully own that. But because of the questions we have around the rest of the slate, that's the other factor at play here that really pushes Rodgers up.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a big thing going through the week is, as you mentioned, who are the guys who are likely to play 4 quarters and have to really be locked in? Aaron Rodgers very much is one of those guys. You talk about teams that you don't want to play in the playoffs. If the Packers get in, I don't think I'd want to see the Packers right now just because they're hot. And, as long as number 12 is upright and walks the earth, you just never know what they can do.
How did the NFC let Aaron Rodgers and Brady in? They had them out.
And you had them down.
Had them out. You had them down.
And you couldn't finish the job.
Now they're both probably going to be in.
Yeah, man, just be careful. Be careful what happens at that point.
We'll see. The Lions could easily beat the Packers. The Lions are playing really well also. But yeah, letting Rodgers and Brady in, that's tough.
It could be a fatal mistake for somebody. Let's get to running backs. And Aaron Jones is the guy who, we're starting to see more A.J. Dillon the last few weeks. But you've got Aaron Jones as a mid-range RB1 this week.
Yeah, and some of this comes back again to looking across the games and knowing which players are going to play. Aaron Jones, his utilization has been down, to your point. He's also been dealing with an ankle injury. So I think there's kind of a combination of things going on. A.J. Dillon is, he's been running hot a little bit. Jones has been hurt. But we know the Packers have to leave everything on the field. It's the win and get in scenario that we just talked about. And Jones still, despite the role, he has 2 top 16 finishes in the last 3 games. So despite the utilization challenges, like he's still got that explosive upside. He can still come through big in the passing game. So if we look at Detroit, they allow 149 yards per game in non-overtime play. That's the 3rd most in the league. So there's just going to be a lot of yardage up for grabs here. And I think it's a deal where Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon can play well. And still, like Aaron Jones is still he just gives you so much more upside than A.J. Dillon because he can break a long play from anywhere. He can get more involved in the passing game, and that can lead to big plays for him. So I've got him as a mid-range RB1. He's really been more of a high-end RB2, low-end RB1. But again, a lot of it has to do with the slate.
So Aaron Jones, mid-range RB1. Surprised to see you've got Jerick McKinnon as an RB2, just high-end, I get it. But I feel like he's been so good. Maybe this is me just in recency bias because of the way he's played in the playoffs. Is it just there are, 12 guys ahead of him you feel better about or what?
Well, he's a tough one for sure because like utilization, in normal things, historical trends tell us Jerick McKinnon shouldn't be doing what he's doing. But your point, so here's the thing, like if he wasn't scoring all the points he's scoring, like he would be like an RB3, but he's just overcoming it all. The difference is like earlier in the year with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I would watch Clyde Edwards-Helaire play and I'd be like, oh, getting caught from behind. Oh, coming off the field on passing downs. There was a lot of things to point to, okay, how's he going to really sustain this? With McKinnon, he's coming through with the big plays. He's very involved in the passing game. He's the number 1 scoring running back in fantasy football over the last 4 games. Who had that on their bingo card? 25.5 points per contest, Marcus. So during that span, though, he has 7 touchdowns. He has 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games, 6 of them receiving. So there's definitely an opportunity for regression here. However, like when you can say all of that, but he's the number 3 target on the Chiefs, 17% target share over this last 4 games. It's the number 1 offense. They convert 33% of their drives into touchdowns. And they're a pass first offense. So you can sit here and talk about regression all day, but he's in the perfect offense to sustain what he's doing. Like if you look at the Chiefs, they throw the ball more than, most teams in every game script. Like when they're trailing by 4 or more, they rank 5th. When they're within 3 points, they rank 3rd in the NFL. And when they're leading by 4+ points, they're 1st in the NFL. They still throw the ball 61% of the time, even when they're leading. So that's a great indicator. Like and people know this. Like I'm restating the obvious and just sharing the data behind it. But we know the Chiefs are a pass first offense, And we already mentioned it. They really need to win. They've got to play on Saturday. That's a gift from the fantasy gods that the Chiefs won't know their fortune. They've got to make sure that they win to keep that 1 seed. So that makes him, honestly, he's really more of a low end RB1, high end RB2. You can call it whatever, but he always has the potential to be the number 1 RB on the slate. I think the good news is we saw in week 16 what a down week kind of looks like for Jerick McKinnon right now.
Right.
And it was still 12.8 fantasy points. So the floor is also better than where it had been in the past. Like the one wild card I would keep an eye on is Mecole Hardman. Like they did activate him off of IR. They've talked about him coming back for the last 2 weeks. I know last week he had a setback in practice. But a lot of that red zone stuff, a lot of that stuff inside the 10 where they get really creative with Mecole Hardman, that stuff's going to Jerick McKinnon now. And so that's helping with the touchdown. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But yeah, McKinnon, as much as you may just want to fade him because you're like, man, this can't, like, how can a guy getting 25% of the carries, right? And he's getting good targets. Like he's, like I said, 17% over the last 4 games. But when you look at it all, you're like, wow, how can he score 30 fantasy points? Well, it's the Chiefs.
It's the Chiefs. I think that sort of kind of boils it down. I also think that he really has sort of been battling with Juju to be that number 2 target behind Travis Kelce for the last few weeks. I feel like it's gone kind of back and forth between the two of them, and that's helped McKinnon a ton. Tony Pollard continues to stay hot. Again, big game for the Cowboys coming up this week. Low end RB1. This feels like the beginning of a trend maybe that carries over into next year too, where we're talking about Tony Pollard sort of is in this low end RB1 range on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I mean, this offseason, like, what are the Cowboys going to do? Are they going to pay Pollard, or are we going to see Pollard go somewhere? Imagine what people would do if Tony Pollard signed with the Chiefs. Or the Bills, any offense where all of a sudden now he's the every down back pretty much,
right.
Like in an explosive passing offense that could really get him involved in the passing game. Because the Cowboys, they've gotten him a little more involved, and we've seen the flashes that when they do, we've seen him just beat a linebacker over the top for a long touchdown. We've seen him take swing passes and just take perfect angles and let the speed hit in, and take plays to the house. Really, it's a lot like what we talked about with Jerick McKinnon. Except he gets more rushing opportunities than McKinnon. So Pollard's, utilization profile is a little bit better. But yeah, like if depending on where he goes, like he could be a top 3 running back in fantasy drafts next year. Depending on what happens. If he stays in Dallas, he's probably going to move up. This last year, he was a round 6, an opportunistic, if you will, round 5, round 6, pick. People swung on the upside, and it's managed to work out. Cowboys probably have at least one more year of Zeke. So there's also the year after if the Cowboys choose to keep Pollard. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But right now, for this weekend, again, we've got another game where the Cowboys, if they win, they have a chance to improve their seeding if the Eagles lose and they play at the same time. So I think Pollard will be all out. He missed last week, but he practiced fully on Wednesday. So it sounds like he's good to go.
So we'll see what Tony Pollard has in store. Najee Harris. Starting to get some more utilization down the stretch, which is sort of nice. I know a lot of folks frustrated with him. What do you have as its outlook for the weekend here?
Yeah, so I look at him as a high-end RB2, which it's been a long time since we've had Najee Harris in that range. So we talked about the Steelers. They're trying to win. They need help. But that's a situation that's going to work in the starter's favor. They're going to continue to play. But the big thing for Harris, really, over the last 2 games, he's picked back up the 2-minute offense. He's had 90% and 100% of those snaps. And that's something that was really huge for him last season. Now, we know we don't get as many checkdowns as we did with Ben, but last year he garnered 94 targets, Marcus. Right now he has 52 heading into week 18. So, not quite cut in half. But this was a big concern, that we talked about in the preseason. It was my biggest reason to fade Najee at ADP. There were other players I faded I was completely wrong on. I was right on Najee, so it's like you get some right, you don't get some right. But it's nice to see him back into this role. It helps the floor. It helps his ceiling, because Najee's not a real explosive player. Like he's a good running back, but he's not one that's going to do a ton. He's not one that's going to break a lot of long runs, right? He's kind of like, hey, give me 4 yards. I'll take the 4 yards. I might run over you for 5, but I'm most likely not gonna, juke you and then take off for 50. Like, he's got some moves in the open field, but he also just doesn't have that breakaway element, to his game. And that hurts because the Steelers, they rank 29th, in converting drives to touchdowns. So that means that he needs the offense to get down inside the 5-yard line to get the touchdowns. And we have seen some receiving touchdowns here lately. So that's the other nice part with him seeing more of the work in the passing game, which previously we had seen Jaylen Warren really take over. So I think this is a positive trend for Najee. He also has a nice matchup. You get the Browns this weekend. They give up a lot of yardage on the ground, and they need to win. So I think these things all stack up to get Najee back into that high-end RB2 status, which is basically where fantasy players were drafting him as a low-end RB1 this summer. So this kind of gets him close to what you thought he would be.
Yeah, I mean, I know the talk of not having Ben and getting all those checkdowns was a big concern for a lot of people, and then we've actually seen, at least for me, more Jaylen Warren than I would have anticipated this season. Mike Tomlin, that offense, Matt Canada getting another running back in there, which is really taken away from Najee's opportunities there. Going the other way, though, in New England, where maybe we thought, would it be Damian Harris's backfield? Would it be Ramondre Stevenson? We've seen more and more Stevenson. Some of that has been because Damian Harris is hurt, but Dwayne, some of it is just because Stevenson has just been the more efficient, more productive back this year.
Yeah, with Stevenson, last weekend we saw his lowest healthy game utilization. So week 14 was lower, but he injured his ankle, right? But since week 4, so week 4 was the last time that he was under, the 60% threshold as far as snaps go. He was at 57% this last weekend. He was also bested by Damian Harris in the rushing department. He only had 38% of the rushing attempts. He had a 49% route participation, also a low since week 4. He did have that same number in week 15, the week after the ankle injury. So I think there's a combination of things going on here. I think we dismissed the ankle injury, Marcus, because he got hurt in week 14, didn't practice all week in week 15, and basically it felt like a game time decision. And a lot of us benched Ramondre Stevenson. Yeah. It was like, hey, there's a chance he's not going to play. He's not going to be effective. And if you remember the way that game started, it looked like that was all coming true. He's just standing on the sidelines doing that thing, where the players put their hands in the shoulder pads and they're just holding him sitting there going, okay. Well, doesn't even have his helmet in his hand. You're like, okay, we're not going to see Ramondre very much this week. The next thing you know, you look up and you're like, wow, 24.8 fantasy points and him breaking off long runs. You're like, I guess his ankle's fine. I don't know what happened. Adrenaline kicked in, but then we all thought, great, we're ready to go. The next week, he did get all the utilization, but 5.3 fantasy points. Then week 17, 7.1 fantasy points. So I do think the ankle is a factor. I think the return of Damian Harris is a factor. This is that must win to get in scenario again, for the Patriots this weekend. So, we'll see. I've got him as a high-end RB2. He has really been a mid-range RB1 for the last several weeks. But the two factors together have me just concerned enough. Now, look, Ramondre, as far as next season goes, we should feel really good. Damian Harris could be gone. New England has finally shown us they're willing to break the mold of we don't, this goes back to Kevin Falk, right? I mean, a lot of people listening to this podcast, you'll probably have to go look up Kevin Falk, that's how far back the passing down role goes here. That was the late 90s, early 2000s that you had Kevin Falk out of LSU, I believe. But it's a scenario where now we've seen that mold broken, and we've heard Bill Belichick just praise Ramondre so much. And man, Marcus, 25% targets per route run. That is really heady. That puts you in the echelon of Alvin Kamara, right there below Christian McCaffrey. He's very, very high end as far as receiving opportunities have gone, and being able to demand targets in the passing game. So Ramondre is going to be a super high draft pick next year, especially if Damian Harris moves on, which probably will be the case.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what happens with Ramondre next year. Because if Damian Harris is gone, it is all systems go. He's really going to take over that backfield in New England. Let's look at some wide receivers. Devonta Smith. We started the year wondering whether or not Jalen Hurts in this passing game could support two guys with AJ Brown being there, and we knew he was going to take up a lot of targets. Turns out the answer is yeah, they're just fine with these two wide receivers. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith have both found a way to not only coexist but to both prosper. So now, are we looking at a 1A, 1B situation in Philly with these two guys?
That's really what it feels like, to me now, Marcus, and it's what the data says. Let's forget feelings. What does the data tell us? Well, I mean, Devonta Smith has out-targeted A.J. Brown in 8 of 16 games this season. He's on the verge of breaking, a record in Philly for the most receiving yards in the first 2 seasons of his career. He's at a 27% target share. That's only 1 percentage point behind A.J. Brown, who is at 28%. Now, A.J.'s about 40 points ahead, in fantasy points in a PPR format because he's got more touchdowns. He's breaking some of the longer plays. But folks have heard us talk about this before. The number one thing you have to do as a receiver that tells me whether or not you're talented, and this is just based on studying this stuff for a long time, is can you earn targets? And if you can earn targets across from another really good player like AJ Brown, Devonta Smith he's a badass. Like, he's a good player. Like, so here's the list, I should say, of second-year wide receivers, Marcus, to reach a 25% target share or higher by their second season, but it can be a first or a second round draft pick. So they've got the draft capital. They hit the 25% target share or higher in their first 2 seasons. Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Mike Evans, Kelvin Benjamin, Josh Gordon, Kendall Wright, AJ Green. So there's a couple of guys that didn't necessarily come through there.
There's always a couple outliers, right? But everybody else,
but it's a good list.
Yeah,
it's a really good list to be on. And if you think back, Kelvin Benjamin did it with no target competition.
Right.
Kendall Wright did it with no one else on the Titans back in the day when he was doing his thing. So you've got Devonta Smith doing it across from AJ Brown. Like, I think this guy, I don't know. Like, again, we're way early, but I lean heavily into the talent profile, especially really early in the season. Like, then you start to bake in some of the other factors, right? As more news, we get free agency, then we get the draft, we get coaching changes, all that kind of stuff that happens in the off season. But like at the end of the year, the thing that we know is is going to be there is like, we're looking at the talent profiles, and like Devonta Smith, he has a wide receiver 1 talent profile. So I know there will be, consternation and wringing of the hands next year because people will be like, are they going to be run heavy? Well, is that a fluke? He's got AJ Brown. What about Dallas Goedert? He was hurt. Like, and I get it. I get all of that. And that could potentially give us a discount. Like, we could get, yesterday on SiriusXM, Pete Overzet brought up a really good comp. Like, hey, you could get the Jalen Warren. Not the Jalen Warren. Yeah.
Jalen Waddle.
Jalen Waddle. Yeah.
Right.
Jalen Waddle. You could get the yeah, you could get that Jalen Warren discount. Like, he's really awesome. The Jalen Waddle discount, because people were just concerned, right? You got Tyreek Hill, you had Mike McDaniel, you had, an offense that maybe was going to be run heavy coming from the 49ers. So we could get some of those same things. And there's a chance that keeps Devonta's ADP next year, more around that round 4 or 5 turn, like where we saw Waddle end up this season. The other bookend of it would be more where we saw T. Higgins this year, which is really at the end of the round 2-3 turn. So I'm super excited about Devonta. Obviously this weekend, like, he's a great play. Philly has put themselves in a situation. Now, some of it's due to the quarterback injury, but Minshew's played pretty well, but they need to win this weekend. So, yeah, I think Smith's a high-end wide receiver, too. And to your question, I do think it's more of a 1A, 1B scenario now versus A.J. Brown's the 1 and Devonta Smith is the 2.
I mean, it is funny to think that, we were wondering about that, we were worrying about that, and almost like forgetting, like, hey, man, this guy won the Heisman Trophy. Like, he was considered the best player in college football for a season. Like, yeah, he can play a little bit. So
remember when he was too small?
He was too skinny, right? He was
BMI,
too skinny.
BMI.
He had to bulk up a little bit in order to play in the NFL. Well, maybe it's better for everybody that he doesn't bulk up. If he gets bigger and stronger, who knows?
He's the wide receiver 9 right now. Like, I don't even know that most people know that.
I know.
And a lot of people tune out, right? You get to the end of the year, you're not in the playoffs, you ignore week 18 for fantasy purposes. Maybe you're just watching for the NFL purposes of it. And so sometimes these things go missed, but like wide receiver 9, even with me, I was like, wow, like, that's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Christian Kirk, who's been very good most of the year. The last 2 weeks, maybe not so much. But you mentioned this. I mean, for the Jags, it's simple: win and in. And they've been playing really good football lately. You've got him as a high-end wide receiver too. I would think that people who got bounced in the playoffs because he didn't perform well would have killed for him to be a high-end wide receiver too the last couple of weeks.
It's been tough because really the Jaguars' passing attack has broke out over the last 4 to 6 games, and had a little bit down these last 2 weeks with some matchups and things like that. But Christian Kirk hasn't been invited to the party. Like everybody's
Mhm.
partying except for Christian Kirk, right? He's just kind of sitting over in the corner, doesn't have a beer in his hand. He's staying sober, but he's ready. He's ready to pounce Marcus. So like, if you look at it like over these 4 games, like it's 8.6 fantasy points, per game. Not good. 19% target share is not bad, but it's really just been Evan Ingram over that period, 25% target share. Zay Jones, 21% target share. So what's been good for the Jags offense is that now they've got multiple weapons that defenses have to account for. That's helped Trevor Lawrence. It's just hurt Christian Kirk a little bit. Now, having said all that, defenses are going to start to notice Evan Ingram now. Like when you're watching the last 3 to 4 games of film, which is typically what an NFL team does, like they go further back, but a heavy amount of what they're going to base things on, right, is they're looking at, what they've done over the last several games. And Zay Jones is also going to be seeing more attention. And I don't think it's suddenly that Christian Kirk isn't good. He also still gets to play in the slot most of the time. So there's an opportunity to protect him from better coverages. But I think Ingram and Zay Jones, like eventually teams are going to, they're like, okay, we've had this conversation, right? You can just imagine these coaches, they don't even, not even saying the receivers' names, you're like, hey, number whatever, we got to watch that guy.
Right.
We got to take him away in this kind of scenario. And the Jags are good enough that they can just go elsewhere, and Christian Kirk can definitely be that option. He still played really well, a 22% target share this season. That's good. His 20% targets per route run, it's okay, but the Jaguars have really been throwing the ball more. But there's multiple things here that stack up really, really well for Christian Kirk this weekend. You already mentioned the Jaguars. They've got to win to keep moving. So we know that they're not going to rest him. Number 2, the Titans are a pass funnel defense. They allow the most non-overtime yards per game, 291 through the air. They're very tough against the rushing attack. So it's going to be something where we're really going to see the Jags lean into that. In fact, if you go back to the last time that the Jaguars played against the Titans, we saw Trevor Lawrence completely light them up. He went off for 368 yards, Marcus, and 3 touchdowns in week 14 against this same defense. So expect the Jaguars to try to duplicate that. Expect the Titans to try to stop it. I just don't know that they can because he has multiple weapons. And then the last thing for Kirk, he's currently at 78 receptions. He has 1,009 yards. This guy could really earn a ton of extra dough this weekend. He has $500,000 bonus, increases at 80 receptions. So he needs 2 for that. But if he has a monster game and gets to 90, he gets another 500,000. He could get to $1 million on 12 catches this weekend. And if he gets to 1,100 yards, he's currently at 1,009. He gets another 500,000. If he somehow had a monster game, he gets another 500,000 at 1,200 yards. So like he would, if he had a monster game, which is not, that's a low percentage chance.
Right.
He could pick up $2 million in one game, like by hitting these I don't know that I've ever seen like the bonuses stack out this way for a player at this point with so much to play for.
Right.
So I love Kirk this weekend. I've got him as a smash play. I mean, you talk about the stars aligning, like even if he didn't have the incentives, like it would be a smash play. The stars would be aligning, but with that on top of it, and the way the Ingram and Zay Jones have played and what defenses are going to have to do to pay more attention to them, like this is just a really, really, really good spot for Christian Kirk.
I know there are some players out there that say they don't pay attention to the stats and that sort of thing, but I feel like if you've got potentially $2 million sitting there on the table, you're paying attention to that a little bit.
You're talking to Trevor Lawrence about it.
Absolutely. I'm sure
take care of him if he can.
I'm sure at lunch he sat next to Trevor and just kind of hinted and nudged a few times. And, hey man, wouldn't hurt if I got a few extra targets this week.
You can see it. Evan Ingram's at the table. Yeah, hey man, but don't forget about me. And they're like, yeah, dude, you got the 10 mil for 1 year. Like, you're now Zay Jones does also have some incentives, but we'll talk about him in a little bit.
All right, let's get to Garrett Wilson though right now because he's been amazing this season. We were excited about the return of Mike White. That didn't quite work out all that well last week, but at this point, I feel like Garrett Wilson has sort of proven himself as a guy that you want to stick in lineups just because the target share is going to be there, the talent is going to be there, all the arrows pointing in the right direction for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Just don't give up now. I know it hasn't been good. He came up with only 4.8 fantasy points last week, but he had 10 targets. You mentioned it. The target share is still there. He's leading the team 25%. He's averaging 8.5 targets per game over the last 4. So he's in a really good spot. The Jets don't have anything to play for necessarily, but they're a young team, right? They don't have I don't think they're going to bench their players. They have a chance to play spoiler here with the Dolphins. You're going to get a lot of man coverage from the Dolphins, which is also an elevator for Wilson. When he plays against, man coverage, he sees more targets. He's also particularly problematic for their style of man cornerbacks. Some of these bigger bodied guys that can't, when you watch Garrett Wilson play, like he's a jitterbug. Like he is just quick twitch all over the place, like can just turn your hips like on a dime, like can really get players twisted up. So there's going to be opportunities where he's going to get one-on-one and have shots deep this weekend. So anytime you get that kind of scenario, we won't be surprised if we look up at the end of the day, we're like, wow, Garrett Wilson, 8 receptions, 135 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like that can totally happen for him this weekend. So he is a high-end wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside.
One last receiver I wanted to talk about, and it's Jameson Williams, who I know we had to wait a while for him to get back on the field, suffered that injury in the national championship game last year. And we haven't seen a ton of him just yet, Dwayne, but I feel like because of circumstances or whatever, this feels like an opportunity maybe to get him a little bit more work. I know, seriously, it's funny. I know week 1, Dan Campbell said they wanted to get him in on special teams and let him get his feet wet there, and they didn't punt that entire game, so that kind of wrecked that plan. But I do want to see if the Lions give him some more opportunity, because I just want to see exactly what he can be in this league.
Yeah, let's give him a chance to re-injure himself on a snap that probably doesn't matter much. But like, look, Dan Campbell's the head coach, not me. He saw a season high 31% route participation last week. It's really been low. It's been in the teens up until now. There's still other players here. You got Josh Reynolds in the mix. We know DJ Chark has been playing really well. Khalif Raymond, has also played, pretty good this season, in relief. So we can't just necessarily project like that all of a sudden he's going to have a bigger role. But what I will say is if the Lions win this game and things work out to where they're in the playoffs, I do think there's an opportunity that we see this role continue to grow. And, if they happen to advance in the playoffs, I think that we could just see it continue to grow, because we've just seen like he's in that kind of spot now where, they're going to start to feel better about the injury. And as good as the other receivers have played, once they know that he is, really good to go from a health perspective, he still won't be 100% from a performance standpoint, but from a not at a high risk to re-injure himself standpoint. And, the conditioning and everything is there. Like there's not another playmaker on the team like him that can do the things that he can. Like Amon-Ra, we love, right? We worship the sun god here, and we appreciate Amon-Ra, and we will never speak ill. Jameson has that ability, though, that if he catches the screen pass, he can go 80, right? And you saw last week the run after the catch. He has the ability on any play, if you give him single coverage, man coverage on the outside, or just a single look and zone rolls the other way, he can just run past he can run past the corner. He can beat coverages with 2 players and get over the top of them. Like he just has that rare ability to be that kind of game breaker where you can come through just on 3 or 4 plays per game. And you look at it and you're like, wow, can this continue? And then you look at the skill set and you're like, well, yeah, probably can, like as long as the offense is humming. So it's just a note like that his role is starting to increase. And honestly, I want the Lions to win. Like I love the Aaron Rodgers story, but I am a Cowboys fan and I don't want to play Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs. And I just want to watch the Lions. Like I just think they're a more fun offense. I would rather watch the Lions offense than the Packers offense, especially if Jameson Williams is going to be a factor.
No, 100%. I mean, I feel like we've seen the Packers. We sort of know what they are at this point. It would be nice to see some new blood, see the Lions in there. Their fan base, I think, is certainly deserving. They have waited a long time for some success, so that would be very cool. And yeah, I think it's worth remembering. Jameson Williams very well might have been the first wide receiver drafted had he not gotten injured. It was that injury that knocked him down the board, and he lands in the Lions' lap, and now he's going to get a chance. Certainly if it's not this year, definitely next year to show off what he can do on an NFL
What do you
field.
think about him next year? Like, I mean, I think we're going to automatically project him as the wide receiver 2 on the Lions, an offense that played well. Like, I think he's probably a wide receiver 3 to start the year, like with upside to work his way as high as the wide receiver 1 conversation. Like, I mean, my guess is he's getting drafted by the time we get in, full frothy draft season mode next year. What do you think? Probably around 5 or 6 pick in
Yeah.
competitive leagues.
Yeah, I was gonna say 7, but I think 6 is probably the sweet spot for him next year. I'm curious to see if the Lions go into next year with Jared Goff at quarterback, or if they go do something else. But we've seen what this offense can be, and what we believe Williams can be. There's gonna be a lot of excitement around there, and I'm with you. I think he's number 2 behind Amon-Ra in this offense next year once he's fully healthy. Couple of tight ends, and I laughed when I saw this name on the sheet. Because I know you and I both loved him and it didn't work out. But Albert Okoye-Bunam is back in our lives. He had 45 yards and a touchdown, which in tight end land means you had a really solid day. So, obviously a lot of it has to do with the injury to Greg Dulcich. But, for at least 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on what happens this week, we can sort of, pat ourselves on the back about Albert O, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, he somehow got himself in the doghouse, and the coaching staff drafted Greg Dulcich. Like, it was a bad recipe for him. He even double clutched the touchdown last week. I was like, oh, Albert, hold on. But he showed that ability that had really shown up in his small sample size, of routes that he had, participated in the 2 seasons before. It's going to be, basically the Chigozium, story, this Okonkwo.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be the Alberto this offseason, right? Small sample size, but has played really well and has popped in all the metrics. So these things don't always hit, but it was nice to see, to your point. We don't want Dulcich to be hurt, but with Dulcich out, and he finally saw some route participation at 62% for Alberto, and he got a 23% targets per route run, which is really good. And he finished second on the team behind Jerry Jeudy with an 18% target share. So I don't know what the ills are that, are hurting Alberto and what that means for him in the future. He's got 1 more year on his contract, but it's trade friendly, cut friendly. Like, they could move on. I'd like to see him get another opportunity, with a different team, where, potentially he's just not in the doghouse to start. We're also going to have a new coaching staff, for the Broncos. So there's a chance even with the Broncos it works out, but you've got Dulcich. Right. So he's probably not going to leapfrog Dulcich, who looked really good. So he needs a trade to really be relevant for next season. But as far as week 18 goes, I mean, I think you can look at him as, that mid-range tight end 2, but he's got tight end 1 upside, like he showed us last week. He was the tight end 9, in week 17.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason we all thought he could be a sleeper tight end. It just didn't work out on the field. So we'll see if, what the future has for him. Last one, Dalton Schultz. And this to me feels like a win in process over results, because we had been talking about the process with Dalton Schultz for weeks. Everything had been working out except the production on the field. Finally, it turns into production. 56 yards, a pair of touchdowns. Hooray for process for Dalton Schultz last week.
Well, we just finally got the combination of high route participation, because he had been hurt earlier in the season with the MCL injury. But he was getting targeted a lot, right? His targets per route run had still been there, and he was coming through with like these low end tight end 1, mid tight end 1 finishes, even though he wasn't getting to be on the field enough. And then he finally gets on the field, and we're like, wait, where'd all the targets go? But week 14, it was solid, 27%. He gave you 14.7 PPR points. He hit a similar number in week 17, 26%, but he scored the 2 touchdowns. And so the big thing is, like, over the last, 5 games, if you look at Schultz, like, he's really been a big part of what they do down and, whenever they get close to the end zone and they want to take shots to the end zone. He's got 30% of the end zone targets since week 10. And the Cowboys, they convert 28% of their drives into touchdowns. That's the 6th best in the league. So when you're on a good offense that's going to have opportunities to throw the ball at, into the end zone a lot, and you are a primary target in the end zone, like that just boosts your ceiling so much. All the other metrics are there. Targets per route run, 21% for the season. He's been over an 85% route participation for the last 5 games. So last week was just the perfect mix of it all finally hitting. And we talked about it. We talked about it multiple times that, like, look, he's going to be the tight end 1 overall. I wrote it last week in the ranks, but I've probably written it like 3 times in the ranks. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep writing it. I'm like, look, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when, because all the metrics we want from a tight end, he has them. And
Mhm.
so it's just, I think he's in great shape. Like if you're playing in playoff contests, like over, on, Underdog or any of the, FFPC, wherever you might be playing, like Dalton Schultz, like he's a really good name to keep in mind, like especially if you're not going to go with Travis Kelsey, that sort of thing. I think Schultz could surprise and be the tight end one overall in those formats. Of course, in those formats, the key is the Cowboys have to win. The good
Right.
news is they are going to have to play week one, and we know they have a good team. So the Cowboys are one of those kind of teams, Marcus, that I like because they've got to play week one, and we know they're good enough to beat
Mhm.
every other team. Now, will they do it? I don't know because there are other good teams that they've got to play, but they could. And you wouldn't look at that kind of at the scenario and be like, "Oh man, it's a long shot for the Cowboys to beat, the Eagles." We know they can beat the Eagles. And now
Mhm.
the 49ers scare me, but the Cowboys could beat the 49ers. They're not going to be like 14-point underdogs to the 49ers,
Right.
right? I doubt they'll be even a touchdown underdog, even playing in San Francisco, right? Probably more like a 4 to 5 point, maybe. If
Mhm.
I was thinking, it might just be three, might be closer than we think. So the Cowboys are that kind of team. You get them to play in the first round of the playoffs, and they could go all the way. So you potentially get the extra game versus the team that has the bye, and everything's looking good for Schultz.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, it's what we thought at the start of the year. A lot of factors have sort of played into him not performing to the way we expected, but looks like it's coming together. Certainly at the right time for the Cowboys, and potentially, as Dwayne mentioned, if you're playing in playoff contests, could be at the right time for you as well. You want more utilization stuff? You want rankings? Go check it out over at fantasylife.com. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter. Go check out the game hubs too while you're there, because everything you want in terms of helping you get ready for the NFL weekend that is to come. As we get ready to wrap it up, you mentioned this, you touched on this a little bit earlier. Some of the incentives, some of the potential records that are at stake this weekend, just kind of going through them a little bit. Patrick Mahomes, a chance to break Peyton Manning's single season passing record. 430 yards, Dwayne. I mean, it's a big number, but it's Mahomes, right? So it's
Yeah.
believable that it could happen, right?
Yeah, and honestly, he just needs efficiency to break his way. He just needs a couple of big plays. Like, I don't think the Chiefs are going to do a lot different. They already run the ball all the time. I mean, they already pass the ball all the time. Like, they're going to pass the ball all the time in this game. He
Hmm.
just needs to come through with some big efficiency. They play the Raiders. I think he has a shot at it. I mean, obviously, we're not going to put it's like if you're looking at a bell curve, this is not in the middle range of the outcomes. It's on the
Right.
outlier to the right side of the outcomes. But, Mahomes has a much higher percentage chance of hitting it probably than any other quarterback, if you knew that you needed 430 to break Manning's record. And also, I mean, the 1.25 million if you win MVP, another really big performance and securing that number one seed goes a long way for Mahomes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the other ones here, Justin Herbert needing 34 completion to break Tom Brady's record. That one seems very tough, just considering the nature of the Chargers offense. Seems a little bit tougher. Jamal Williams right now tied with Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, and Jalen Hurts with rushing touchdowns. Justin Jefferson, 194 yards to break Calvin Johnson's record. I will say, Dwayne, this not impossible because we've seen Justin Jefferson have huge games. It feels like it would have been a little bit easier had he
Yeah.
had more than 15 yards last week. But I had a chance to talk to him at the Pro Bowl last year, and I sort of jokingly asked him, who's going to get to 2,000 yards in a season first? Is it you or is it Jamar Chase, your old college teammate? And he said, without a doubt, like, didn't even hesitate. It's going to be me. He's like, in fact, when I'm done with this interview, I'm going to go text him and tell him that I'm going to get to 2,000 yards. That might be a little tough, but I feel like we're going to pass this way again. Even if he doesn't get here this year, Dwayne, I feel like Justin Jefferson is going to knock on the door of breaking down Calvin Johnson's record at some point. He just seems too good.
Yeah, for sure. And not to be Debbie Downer, it's still like great. Like it's the 17 game season now,
Yeah.
so these players get an extra, game to do it. And kind of like Mahomes, like if there is a player that you're like, wow, 194, like it could happen. Like it's
Hmm.
it's on it's on the outer edge. But if the Vikings decided to really scheme up a bunch of stuff on top of all the targets he just earns on his own this weekend, which they could easily do, they could give him a shot, at breaking this record. So we'll see what happens. The Vikings, they play in the early window. They won't know if the Eagles have lost or not yet, and they won't know about the 49ers. Really the bigger thing for them is the 49ers. And they have a shot at the 2 seed, so they should be playing hard.
Yeah. Last couple that are interesting. Zay Jones needs two catches for 250,000, 98 yards for 500,000. So potentially $750,000 on the table for him. Might be a tough week for Evan Ingram to get targets between Zay Jones
I
and
know.
Christian Kirk, needing some things there. Gerald Everett, 5 catches for 250,000, and Hayden Hurst, 100 yards to get 125 grand, 12 catches to get 250 grand. I love your parenthetical here. Sorry, Hayden, but we can dream. Yeah, that feels really tough for Hayden
Yeah.
Hurst this week.
Yeah.
So
But
we'll
you
see.
know, maybe gives him a little bit of a chance to be, we've had Tyler Boyd really recovering from an injury. Maybe
Yeah.
he's the third guy. You know, it's just so tough when you've got T Higgins and Jamar Chase. Like it really doesn't matter what incentives are on the table because those guys are just going to be open.
They're gonna open, they're gonna get targets, and they're gonna eat, no doubt about it. I think is a good place to sort of let it be for this week. It is the final week of the NFL regular season, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of contests out there that are coming to an end, or maybe some that may just be starting as you get ready for the postseason. Of course, you can get all the information you need to help you out at fantasylife.com. Be sure to go check it out. Sign up for the newsletter while you're there. I say it all the time. I'm still going to keep saying it. Sign up for the newsletter while you are there. In the meantime, that'll do it for this edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. For Dwayne, I am Marcus. Enjoy Week 18, everybody, and we'll talk to you again real soon.